athletes skip the emotional recovery piece just to chase the physical recovery. And then oftentimes we wonder why when they come back physically ready, but they're mentally not ready. So we're talking about injury, helping them focus on grief past or that loss past the injury. What does that story look like for you now since you've had that injury?
Welcome back to Beyond the Steps, produced by Apollo Performance and Turning Point Dance Creations. This is week 3 of our May series with Damion Harmon, not your average therapist. And today we're closing out our guest conversation with a topic that's incredibly close to home for so many dancers and athletes. I know it is for Melissa and me as well. Grief after injury. When your body is the instrument and your body becomes the source of loss, the grief is different. It is layered. It touches identity in ways that are hard to put into words. You feel it deeply, and it does not get nearly enough attention in the athletic world. Damion, welcome back for one final week. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a blast.
So, Damien, for dancers or athletes, an injury is never just a physical setback. It feels like a loss of identity because there's usually a lot of loss of your actual activity that goes around it. Can you speak to the grief that comes with injury for an athlete or a performance artist and why it's so much different than like somebody who broke their leg in the community that might not be an athlete or a performer?
You're absolutely right. It definitely hits different. One of the main reasons why, because it takes you away from what you do and quote unquote who you are at the same time. Oftentimes you would say, if I'm a football player, I'll say I'm a football player versus saying I play football, right? And so sometimes that little word shift right there, it places that you as that entity versus you being able to separate yourself if that's something that I play or that's something that I do. I actually encapsulate, that particular thing. So it takes you away from what you do and who you are at the same time. And for a lot of athletes, and even dancers, football players, basketball players, they just don't play the sport. They look at it as they are the sport. So if they're hurt, then that sport no longer exists in their mind. And so when that's gone, even if it's temporary, it creates that identity crisis for them. So they're grieving one, their body, right? Because again, we talked on the previous episode about the Superman complex. So you're grieving the fact that you actually harmed a part of your body. But not only that, your routine, what you normally do on a daily basis, day in, day out, you're practicing, you're rehearsing, you're competing, all those different things. Now that comes to a screeching halt, like you're no longer doing that. But also, underneath that is their purpose. If I'm not doing this particular thing, who am I? What is my purpose on this earth during this particular time? And last but not least is their sense of control. Like when you get hurt, like that could happen at any given point in time. It could be a freak accident. You could just be walking or, whatever, and trip over something and you're out for 6 months because you got a torn ACL, ACL or something like that. So those are some of the things that injury does, especially for athletes, because we are tied so much to that particular thing that we do that we've, made it who we are.
I have a question. So you see this handled two different ways. When an athlete gets injured, you see some athletes, which is kind of the school of thought that I have and I operate from, is like that athlete should still go to practice. That athlete should still go up to the games, right? And like or the performances, right? And be there to support and watch because inevitably they're going to come back from that injury most of the time. 95% of the time they'll come back, right? And you can get something from watching. They're still part of the team. They're an important part of the team. They don't just disappear because they're injured. Does that But then there's also people that don't believe in that. There's people that are like they're injured and the parents are like, "Woohoo, I don't have to take them to practice for like 6 to 8 weeks. I have, nights off now and I don't have to go and we can get homework done and have our life back as a family." And in my mind, I'm like, it's got to be better mentally for the athlete to still show up, be part of the group, be part of that routine that they've spent so much time honing their craft. Is there a right or a wrong answer to that or approach when it comes to a way to manage that grief better?
That's a really, really good question because oftentimes, well, when you mention the parents, they're seeing how they're benefiting from the injury, unfortunately. Okay, I don't have to take my kids to practice. I don't have to be at this particular competition. I don't have to travel for 6 to 8 weeks. Now I get a relief. But we're not focusing, on the actual person that's being harmed or that's grieving, right? So looking at it from both lens. Some athletes, they want to be able to step away because what's happening is they may be often being re-triggered. So it's like they're losing every time, they're grieving every time that they step, sitting on the bench and kind of watching everybody else do what they do, right? And so it's kind of like it could be traumatizing for them to a certain extent. And there are also some athletes, like you said, being able to say, okay, just because I'm not doing, there are other ways that I can gain mentally and taking the mental reps while I'm injured, or being able to see it from a different perspective because I'm normally out there doing it. If I sat back and looked, from a different angle or different lens on how I can improve once I get back out there, I can see it a little bit different. So there's really not a right or wrong. It's really person centered on how do we handle that. Is your athlete that particular type of person that's able to see it from a different lens, or the grief is so difficult to manage that every time that they're there, it's kind of like it's a dark cloud looming over them, and it's kind of like, man, I wish I was out there.
So I'm hearing you say that it really is up to the athlete, but it needs to be up to the athlete, not like force fed either direction. Like the athlete gets to decide where they are in that space. And maybe they don't show up in the beginning, but then they start to go after they processed it for a couple weeks, right? Or like some combination, but it's up to the athlete.
It's just like grief. Some people, depending on what level of grief it is and what they're grieving, they're able to kind of get back into it. They may take a day. There may be one person that may take a day or two. It may be a person that take a week or two. It just depends on that person, and it's not linear. So it's kind of like we don't have like, okay, this is a set amount of time that you can be away from the team due to this particular injury. It's really person centered.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Okay, so pivoting really quick, there's so much pressure to bounce back quickly, right? When you're injured, you got to get back in it. You got to catch up to what you missed. You get that from coaches, from parents, from the athlete themselves, putting pressure on themselves. How does that pressure affect the grieving process? And what do you wish more people understood about the emotional timeline of recovery? Does it end when the injury is healed?
Quick answer, absolutely not. It doesn't end when the injury, when they come back off of injury. And like that pressure, it actually interrupts grief because grief requires you to slow down, right? But performance culture demands speed. Like, let's get to this rehab. Let's do everything that we need to do so we can get back, into action. So what ends up happening is athletes skip the emotional recovery piece just to chase the physical recovery. And then oftentimes we wonder why when they come back physically ready, but they're mentally not ready. And I see it all the time, in different levels of sports. They may be physically cleared to play, but mentally they may not be there yet. So, like I said before, healing. Go ahead.
Yeah, and, like, coming back from an injury, like, there's a kid on my son's team that had a really nasty shoulder break, and, he was out for he missed months, like, a couple months, 2 to 3 months of training, and he's working to get back to where he was before, but you can see the hesitation. He's a little bit nervous when he's out there, afraid that he's going to get re-injured. So I think a lot of people don't realize the mental aspect of that as well. Like when you go through a traumatic injury, the last thing you want to do is get re-injured. And so your whole lens of the way you look at your sport is now kind of through this like filter of fear, right?
From a clinical perspective, Damien, what are some of the tools or frameworks that you use to help athletes move through injury grief, but not back to performance, back to themselves as a whole person?
When it comes to framework, when it comes to therapy, you definitely have to have some level of foundation in what you're doing. It's really not just, talking, but really having a framework and how we're going to get back to these particular goals. Every time I'm working with a client, we have a goal for therapy or multiple goals. We need to know, what does the end look like for you in treatment. So for me, I often focus on at least three things. Narrative work, and that really causes. I'm really a huge proponent of journaling, and journaling to the point of helping them rewrite their story beyond the injury. So we're talking about injury, helping them focus on grief past, or that loss past the injury. What does that story look like for you now since you've had that injury, right? Since you've experienced that grief, what does life look like for you now? What do you want it to look like? So that's the narrative work. And then two, being able to expand their identity, right? Because like we said before, like we often encapsulate or just make ourselves that particular thing versus seeing us as just that's just one aspect of what we do. We're not, I'm not a football player. I play football or played football. So being able to expand the identity and being able to answer and ask the question, you are more than what you do, right? So what does that look like? What are some other things that you're into? What gives you that gratification outside of the sport? Right? And then last but not least is emotional regulation. That's what therapy primarily is being able to teach them how to sit within that grief, sit within that anger, that frustration, that fear, and that uncertainty. And honestly, sometimes the work isn't about getting them back to performance. It's about them getting back to themselves or even redefining who they see themselves as.
So if you could give one piece of advice to a dance educator or a coach that's supporting an injured athlete right now, what would it be?
But I would definitely say don't rush them, not their recovery, not their emotions, not their identity shift. Support them as a person, not just a performer. Because if you only focus on getting them back to the sport, you might lose them as a person in the process.
For all of you watching out there, have you navigated grief after an injury as an athlete or a parent or an educator? We want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments below and let's just keep this conversation going. I think the more we talk about it, the more we can normalize it, as Damion so poignantly indicated in the first episode. Before we get to our guest resources today, we want to take a moment to share something we're really, really proud of. The Beyond the Steps program is a resource. It's a free resource built specifically for dancers, athletes, and educators who want to keep growing in their education and their knowledge beyond this conversation. If today's episode resonated with you in any way, this is your next step. Click the link below, visit Apollo Performance to get the full program. You can go at your own pace, share it with your community, and I promise you, you won't regret it.
So we've been really honored that Damion made the time for us for the past few weeks. He's an author, he's a therapist, he's a public speaker, and you want to get in touch with him. So, Damion, can you tell us how people can get in touch with you to work with you and to access your book and your resources?
Sure. Definitely go to my website, thecouchcollc.com. That's TheCouchCollC.com. I have all my resources there, access to the TED Talk. Also, my book is A Loss is a Loss. It's a book and a workbook. So definitely tap into that if you're experiencing grief or if you know anyone that has experienced grief, and even the griefs that we've been talking about today, utilize it. It's a great resource, not just because I wrote it. It's really great. But also you can follow me on social media. On Instagram, it's not your average underscore therapist, and I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn under my government name, Damion Harmon.
Thank you so much, Damion. What a way to close out this series. The honesty, the clinical depth, the realness that you brought to every one of these conversations. Our audience is going to be sitting with this for a long time, and honestly, so are we. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I definitely enjoyed myself.
Until then, we hope you continue your